Gives us tremendous pleasure to once again be collaborating with the International Reporting Project and Louise Leaf, who I'll turn the floor over to in just a moment. We at the Center, as the formal memorial to Wilson, a nonpartisan, non-advocacy forum to try to bring the worlds of research and practice and policy together, always find it tremendously useful to engage with the media and with journalists in helping, in many ways, be the translators, interpreters, the bridge between those communities, and often the place that each community tracks what the other is doing, and understand through the stories that they tell and the reporting that they do how these critical international issues are evolving and how they're covered and how we need to try to address them in more productive fashions, because as in so many parts of the world, things aren't exactly going terrifically well. But at the same time, there are some terrific positive stories to tell, and we need to have those as well. So it gives us great pleasure to once again be working with the International Reporting Project, a very productive collaboration that we've had for a couple years now. And it's one that we are fortunate to be continuing with. I'll do my quick advertisements right now. On October 14th, for example, along with IRP and the Society of Environmental Journalists, we're going to have a panel on how to cover environment and population issues. So Dennis Dimmick from National Geographic, Emily Douglas from The Nation, and Andy Revkin from the New York Times, whether he's beamed in by video or here in person, depending on a couple assignments. We'll be tackling this in this kind of session that we're trying to facilitate this discussion, and as we'll hear from Louise, the challenges that journalism itself is facing. It makes it all the more important to provide these forums and provide these opportunities for journalists to cover these stories and get the support that they need, and hopefully the column inches and the online equivalent to cover these important but often neglected issues, particularly in the international context. I should also say special thanks to Louise and to my colleague Megan Parker, who've really put together this program and many like it with our IRP collaboration. Unfortunately, Megan's sick, and I can tell her now to stop watching the video cast, put down the computer, and get better so that you can come back. She's telling me she's going to watch online. I'm telling her to put away the computer. She can watch the video archive, which is something else in terms of introduction. We are webcasting today's event, so when it comes to Q&A, if you could use a microphone to tell us your name and ask your question to the panel so the folks online can watch this as well, and then the video will be archived so that we can all share it with others who aren't fortunate enough to see it live or view it live. So just a very quick introduction of our three speakers from this Gatekeepers editors trip that IRP sponsored to Kenya. The topic we're covering, reporting from Kenya, U.S. editors covering health, environment, and security. It's a real pleasure for us to welcome three from that trip. Andrea Crossan is a radio producer at BBC World Service, and as you can see from the bio, I'm going to keep it real quick. As you can see, all of our panelists have distinguished careers in journalism, covering these issues from a variety of different standpoints and a variety of different parts of the world. Stephanie Hanson, Associate Director and Coordinating Editor for CFR.org. I told her just a moment ago that really the CFR site is the gold standard in our world of this kind of institute, think tank world, and I'm constantly pointing to their website as what we should try to be adopting some elements of, so it's great to have her here today. And Margaret McElligott is working every shift on the 24-hour news desk and coming to WashingtonPost.com. As you know, that doesn't sleep like so much of journalism, and so it's terrific to have our hometown, but truly national, international newspaper online presence here as well. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Louise, who can kick us off in introducing the IRP, the program, and our three speakers.
Great. My name is Louise Leaf. I'm Deputy Director of the International Reporting Project, and I want to thank the Africa Program and the Environmental Change and Security Program and the Global Health Initiative for hosting us. We find the Wilson Center an incredible resource. We just had a group of fellows from another program that we have here for lunch, and they came back bursting with ideas and really impressed with the staff and the scholars that they met here. And there was a lot of very useful cross-pollination. I also want to thank all of you for coming. This is one of our favorite events that we do because you are also knowledgeable and involved in very different ways in the topics that we talk about, in this case Africa, and I recognize several of you. So I'm going to put out my cards at the end, and please do take them and be in touch with us. I know we've drawn on some of the people that we've met through these meetings for suggestions of programs to do and people to meet in future trips that we do. I wanted to just, for those of you who don't know about the International Reporting Project, just to spend a minute or two telling you what it is. It was founded in 1998 by our director, John Shidlovsky, who's sitting there in the blue shirt, to address a need in the U.S. media. Many in the U.S. media never get the opportunity to go overseas and do overseas reporting. There's no lack of desire on the part of individual reporters and editors, but the way the U.S. media has been structured and continues to be structured, there are very limited opportunities for economic and other reasons. So John felt that this was a way to provide those opportunities because, as you know, you can read about a situation, but you really can't understand it fully unless you've actually gone and experienced it, and then you get context and depth to these issues that you would never otherwise get. So our program has many different levels. We have a group that's out now, one of 10 journalists doing reporting. One of them is actually in Kenya, looking at various land issues. And then we have a program for decision makers in the newsroom, who are Gatekeeper editors, and we take them on a trip to a country that is undercovered in the U.S. media, and we look at a wide variety of issues. So it's not a single topic kind of trip. We try to hit as many bases as possible with the idea that it's opening the door to future engagement with the region, that they have a Rolodex of people that they can call, and when a topic comes up on a range of issues, they have resources to go deeper into that topic. So we're very pleased to have 3 representatives from our Kenya trip. I did want to spend a minute talking about the economic crisis currently in the U.S. media, because it's very relevant to what we do, and in a way it's changed what our mission has been in some very in some very significant ways. There was recently, I think a week or two ago, Unity, which is the Association of Minority Journalists, came out with a report on the general state of the U.S. media with very sobering statistics. In the past year and a half, there's been a loss of 50,000 journalism jobs. That's 50,000, and it's a relatively small sector compared to other sectors of the economy. The general layoff rate among the U.S. employers is 8%. Among journalists, it's 22%. So it was always a challenge to get enough overseas reporting and good quality overseas reporting in the U.S. media. Now it's even more of a challenge. With technological innovations, one of the interesting things that's been happening, and we are participating in it as well, and like to think that we were one of the first to be going in that direction, is that nonprofit organizations such as ourselves have also become content providers. So the group that we have out now is going to be producing stories that might not otherwise be produced. That's a program for reporters as opposed to editors. I just wanted to have a plug for 2 programs we have coming up. We have 3 looking at the issue of loose nukes. On October 21st, the flyers outside, they'll be speaking at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. The very next day, on October 22nd, we have a variety of people who've gone to places like Rwanda, India, Bangladesh, Thailand, Pakistan, Brazil, looking at a variety of issues. What they're looking at is available on our website, and that will be on October 22nd. You're all more than welcome to come and attend these events. So in what we're looking at as an organization, given the state and the difficulties that the U.S. media is trying to work through as they transition through the technology and also the recent recession, is we have been producing some videos that have appeared on various news shows. The one I'm going to show you now it's a little bit of an overview of the kinds of issues that we've been looking at, and that appeared on a very prominent link on the NewsHour website. We've had 2 more on different topics. That one has appeared on the PBS program World Focus on new malaria vaccine initiative, and another one is coming out on the impact of climate change and water scarcity. on Kenya. So, and there are a couple more in the works. So I thought we would start showing you this video, which kind of give you a sense of the kinds of things we do on these trips, and kind of gives you an overview of some of the major issues that we were looking at.
This is Nairobi, the capital of Kenya, a nation once considered among the most stable democratic states in Africa. But after a disputed election in December 2007, ethnic violence tore the country apart. Organized gangs killed over 1,000 people, and thousands more were internally displaced.
None of the individuals identified as the sponsors of political violence actually had to face even the shame of having done what they did. They are still members of the establishment, and they are ready to do it again.
Now, 18 months after the failed election, Kenyans are at odds with a coalition government that has struggled to deliver concrete reforms.
The ballot has failed to transform the lives of the people. When people cast their ballot and now they start actually regretting why they voted, then it tells you that our democracy has fallen short of something very essential.
The belief that the system actually delivers fair results is absolutely central to its stability. It's an illustration of the population's capacity to, in fact, remove their leaders when they don't trust them anymore.
Many Kenyans are dissatisfied with the ruling coalition, but the government insists it is moving forward with constitutional reform.
We managed to dismantle the former electoral commission and set up a new one in place. We managed to put up a team to spearhead the process of constitutional review.
We want to see a democracy that will bring food on somebody else's table. We want to see a democracy that will make people to go and get work. If democracy cannot sustain people's lives, then we have no business still start shouting democracy to the top of our voice or to the top of our lungs.
This is the country where people are struggling, and they hardly see any hope into what the political class is doing, and what I would call the Nairobi bubble between parliament and the ministries, the Nairobi Stock Exchange and the big banks. Do they care really about the country at the time where it is deeply in crisis? It doesn't look like that.
On the semi-arid Gatekeeper plateau in central Kenya, unemployment abounds. Tension between farmers and pastoralists has grown as water becomes increasingly scarce. Most of the water is diverted upstream to irrigate farms, which leaves a dwindling supply for Gatekeeper's people and their cattle.
Lots of natural resources puts people under extreme pressure, and people will go to extreme lengths in order to get those fundamentally important natural resources.
Ndio maji imekuwa kidogo, lakini hajaikuona maji katika namna hiyo. Lakini siku hizi amekauka, maua hakuna, hata samaki natoka kila mtu na shika na mkono. Sina lia maji sana Garingiro.
This year, for the first time ever, for the first time in history, the big Iwasanyira River actually dried up.
Sisi nasema kama maji takatika namna hiyo, utaenda mahali paka mahali maji natukia panda mo Kenya. Hata kama serikali nakataza sisi takufa. Hakuna namna. Najua rafiki hawezi chakua pita bure. Kama kiangazi kilali tapata wewe, lazima kama wewe kuna chakula mitakuja kutafuta.
The implications in our situation are quite serious, because we are now mixing people whose way of life and whose ethnicity are different, and because of the part of the world that we live in, the Horn of Africa, almost every pastoralist will have an automatic weapon.
Wakubwa yetu hata nakongana, sijui nitasaidia sisi. Nao wameshiba. Na mimi ndio huyu sasa mimi nafanya kazi hapa, hata mshahara toshi. Mimi hawezi kaa namna hiyo.
Kibera is an informal settlement of a population of about 1 million people. It is in the southern side of Nairobi. Kibera is characterized by gross violation of human rights, ranging from right to housing, right to water, right to basic need like food, clothing. 2007, when Kenya was experiencing the post-election violence, you saw Kibera was actually worst hit. It was worst hit because of the idleness of the youth. If you look at the biggest population, who are the youths, who do not also have employment, it is telling you that the youths are a time bomb. In case of any trigger, you will see even people will come out in big numbers, people will come out in large numbers. It will degenerate into a revolutionary movement that can even overthrow the government. They only need somebody who can lead them, then it will explode.
During her visit to Kenya, U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton will call upon Kenya's leadership to summon an independent tribunal to investigate the post-election violence of last year. Clinton's message will echo Washington's demand that Kenya stop corruption, forge a new constitution, and regain its status as a stable ally in the Horn of Africa.
Luis, could I just say, from the Wilson Center perspective, tremendous film. I'm sorry, most of Kenya does not look half blue. Apologies on the cameras. Our excellent audiovisual support team knows it's a problem. They have the cameras. They don't have the little gizmos to connect them to the ceiling, but hopefully next time we're all back here, half the Kenyan world won't look blue. So apologies. Perfect, yes. No, so I think we were going to throw it to Andrea for the first presentation. Yeah.
Sure. Good afternoon. As Jeff mentioned, I'm a radio producer. I work for a program called The World, which is a co-production between the BBC World Service and WGBH in Boston. It's a 1-hour program that airs on weekdays, and it's bringing international news to an American audience. So part of our funding comes from the BBC World Service, and part of it is from WGBH. It's safe to say on both sides of the funding of our pots of money have gotten much smaller in the last year. And obviously the global recession has, as Louise mentioned, it's hurt programs. It's been very hard on journalists. I feel very badly. I feel very badly for journalists who are coming into the market at this point. I think it would be a very difficult time to be trying to become a journalist. And one thing that happens when you have these kind of cutbacks, even with a large organization like the BBC, you really feel it when it comes to foreign coverage. So what happens is you see a lot of foreign bureaus shutting. And that's not something that's just been happening in the last year. It's really been the last decade. You've seen a lot of areas of the world that just aren't getting the coverage that some of these places deserve. And Africa is one of these places. And there's a number of reasons for that. Part of it is because it's so extremely expensive. It's expensive to get reporters in and out of Africa. Traveling domestically in Africa is extremely expensive. The satellite equipment, the security equipment, all this kind of things. It's very, very expensive. So the opportunity that I had and that my friends on the panel had to go to Kenya was an incredible one. And one of the things that was really special about it was that when things happen, like what happened at the end of December in 2007 and the beginning of 2008, when you have violence like there was in Kenya, the international media is interested. And we always joke that it's like the skies are black with planes. Everyone converges on the disaster, on the crisis, on the violence. And then what happened is in March of 2008, there was a negotiated coalition government. And everyone went, okay, there's peace. Fantastic. Let's get back on the planes. So even if there had been a great deal of interest in Kenya for a period of time, it's very hard to sustain or even to have a sort of a follow-up, to have people in the country to look at what that post-conflict situation looks like. So we had the great opportunity to do that in our trip when we were there in earlier in the summer. The part of the trip that I'd like to focus on is Kibera, which you saw some images of that Siobhan did a beautiful job of videotaping on our trip. And the thing that was I found particularly powerful about visiting Kibera is that I've traveled a fair amount with the BBC, and I've seen some really difficult living conditions for people. I've never seen anything like I saw in Kibera. 1 million people, very little water, access to water. They have to pay for water. Very little access to electricity. They have a 10% rate of HIV. They have some malaria. It's worse in other parts of Kenya, but they do have malaria there as well. So it's one of these places where I think we can look at all of the things that we're talking about today when we're looking at health, when we're looking at security, when we're looking at environment. You can look at all of it through what's happening in Kibera. I did a number of stories that I reported while I had the opportunity to be in country. And I did one story that I think received the most feedback and I got the most emails from people was about a gentleman by the name of Solomon Moyundo. And he's just this great character. I met him in Kibera because you may have seen on a couple of the images that there was this in white paint on the side of walls. You would see these phrase, "Peace wanted alive," and he painted it everywhere. He'd painted this guy had painted this slogan in 4,000 places in Kibera in this slum. So you couldn't look around on any street, bridge, trees. He joked with me that he painted his dog with the phrase "Peace wanted alive," and he did this because he witnessed just this complete breakdown of community and breakdown of society after the violence or after the elections. And he had to, right after when the violence started, he would see these crowds of kids, these teenage kids walking the streets, and they'd have machetes. And they'd be shouting, "No Raila, no peace." So basically just to kind of save his skin, because he was not of the same ethnic group as Raila Odinga, he tells a story about how he jumped to the front of the crowd and started chanting, "No Raila, no peace." And he did it just so that they thought he was supporting who they supported and saved himself. So the story that I recorded was I sat with him in this little tiny sort of rickety shack / art studio that he has in Kibera. And I sat down, put a microphone in front of him, and he talked for about 30 minutes. And it was one of these conversations where I didn't actually, I didn't have to ask him any questions. I just said, "So, tell me about the day. Tell me what happened. Tell me about the week that followed when the violence started." And he seamlessly talked for 30 minutes. And I cut pieces of this conversation together. And the story ran pegged to Hillary Clinton's visit to Kenya. And like I said, it was a story that received the most attention of anything that I did during the time that I was there. I reported a number of stories from Kenya, but Solomon's story touched people, I think, because I think it gave people, I think, a sense of how your world can turn upside down, and how even in a place that's like Kibera, which is extremely poor, there is a sense of community. And these are people's lives and their homes and their businesses and their shops. And, having to witness that kind of violence, it has a huge impact on people. And telling it through this one person was the best way I could do that. I did, there's one other story that I'm going to mention that I did in Kibera, which is about swine flu. And it relates to how we can connect things that are going on. It's you know, the micro and the macro. Being able to look at a place like Kibera and look at how my story was about the potential for what could happen if swine flu were to take hold in a place like Kibera, a place where, like I mentioned, it's an incubator for illness. It's a place where when you have such terrible living circumstances, and you have people with such a high rate of HIV. So the story was focusing on what the CDC was doing to look at what would happen, and monitoring for cases of swine flu in Kibera, because at that point it had not hit sub-Saharan Africa, and there was a big concern about how it would impact people who had already compromised immune systems. So, I mean, I guess to sum up, my reporting experience was focused on aspects of how what happened within this slum, and how it relates to health, how it relates to security, how it relates to environment. I found it all in this community of people, and it was an incredible experience. I think that the reporting that I was able to do in Kibera is going to be something that airs on our program for, I still have like 3 or 4 stories that I have yet to get my head down and write. But it was the thing that had the greatest impact on me during my experience, and I'm incredibly grateful to the IRP for being able to allow me to go there and do that and see it.
I just wanted to mention that all the stories by these editors and everyone who went on the trip are on our website at www.internationalreportingproject.org, if you want to follow.
Good. Stephanie, why don't we turn it over to you?
Hi, I'm Stephanie Hanson. I work at the Council on Foreign Relations for the Council's website. And Andrea mentioned a bit about the difficult climate for international news and the mainstream media. We are somewhat a response to that. I work with a team of 10 journalists who cover different parts of U.S. foreign policy toward the world, and we're attempting, in a way, to fill the gap that has been created by the closing of foreign bureaus all over the world. However, we're very small and we have limited funding, so it's very unusual for me to have the opportunity to travel to Africa, though I've been writing about it for the Council for a little over 3 years. So the IRP trip to Kenya was a wonderful opportunity for me to visit kind of one of the most important countries on the continent, a business hub, a foreign organization hub, an NGO hub, and really get a sense of not just what was going on in Kenya, but how Kenya was representative of a lot of trends on the continent. And actually, it's very interesting that Andrea chose to focus on Kibera, because before we went to Kenya, I thought that that was going to be the major area of interest for me in terms of reporting. I planned to stay on past the end of the fellowship and do some additional reporting, and I thought that I was going to spend all of my time in Kibera. What actually happened, because of the program that we had set up for us, Louise took us out to western Kenya, to Nyanza province, which is near Kisumu, a city on Lake Victoria. And Nyanza is actually the area where Barack Obama's father comes from. And it's one of the poorest provinces in Kenya and one of the areas with the highest HIV rates and also malaria rates. Malaria was, to be honest, not a disease that was really on my radar, even as someone who has been writing about Africa. And I guess that I, in a way, discounted its importance to what's happening on the continent. Taking this trip out to Western Kenya and going out with the CDC and also KEMRI, which is Kenya's Medical Research Institute, we visited a district hospital called Siaya District Hospital. We spent several hours there visiting the wards, talking to doctors, meeting patients. We visited the children's critical care ward there. It's very small, maybe I would say 20 beds at the most. Almost every bed was filled with a child who was sick with malaria. This was shocking to me. I didn't expect it. I had no idea that this was the most prevalent medical issue in the area. And Speaking to the mothers who brought their young children to this hospital, their stories were just incredible. Some of them had walked hours to the hospital with a sick child. They had left children at home to make the trip to the hospital. They had had to leave their children either with neighbors, with other family members, and they may have had to stay at the hospital for 3 days, 5 days, 9 days. I met one woman who actually had been there for 21 days, and she was ready to go home with her child, but she wasn't able to pay the hospital bill. So she was waiting for another family member, her mother, to actually physically come to the hospital, pay off the bill so that they could leave and go back home to their farm. Seeing how malaria affected the hospital was one thing. It has a tremendous impact on the healthcare system in Kenya, and not just in Kenya, all over East Africa this is an issue. But talking to these women and understanding their stories really gave me a sense of what kind of economic impact malaria has on the country. When these women have to leave their farms to come to the clinic, they're losing work days on the farm. Women do the bulk of agriculture work in Kenya. And that just means that their farms are less productive. They have less money to send their children to school, give their children medical care, and feed their children. So you can see kind of all of these things end up being connected. One other place that we visited on the IRP trip was the Millennium Villages project. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the MVP. It's a quite popular project. We were able to go to the very first Millennium Village, and their philosophy is that you have to make development interventions on health, agriculture, education, infrastructure, all of these things at once. It's a tremendously ambitious project, and I think was incredibly interesting to see how they're executing it. The people who are benefiting from the project are tremendously grateful, have seen increases in crop yields, have clinics, functional clinics to take their children, have schools with wonderful school feeding programs. Visiting other parts of Western Kenya, talking to people in Nyanza province, they're not as lucky. They don't have all of these things, which raises a lot of questions about the Kenyan government and what the Kenyan government is really able to do for its citizens. So being in Kenya, I think I really realized, as someone who covers a lot of U.S. policy issues towards Africa, that these sort of macro political issues, disputed elections, post-election violence, actually are connected to daily issues like malaria infections, hospital capacity rates, agriculture yields. And without a government that can address those things, it's very difficult to see how a place like Kenya can move forward.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Stephanie. Margaret, last but not least.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Margaret McElligott. I'm at WashingtonPost.com. I should say the Post is very fortunate in the sense that it's shrunk enormously through rounds of buyouts. We haven't had layoffs yet, and we still have our foreign bureaus. So Stephanie McCrumman is based in Nairobi and does great work there, but also from Nairobi covers Somalia and Sudan and the DRC, all very important stories for what the Post does. So this was a great opportunity for me to get to Kenya and hopefully strengthen the context that we have at the news desk when news happens in Kenya, or when we're just having a longer form story that Stephanie's working on that we need to make sure gets appropriate play on the homepage. And for me, the trip to Kenya was a fabulous return to a place I'd never been, which sounds absolutely ridiculous. But I'd worked at allafrica.com for 3 years before I came to the Post. And so I was fortunate to every single day I read The Nation and the East African Standard, and every week I read the East African. And had been in Uganda and had been in Tanzania and had never been to the behemoth of East Africa. I'd never been to Kenya. So I was very excited to be able to go and to see, to visit a country that I'd read so much about, and see how real life and real kind of politics when you're talking to a cabbie and not reading a story from what a politician says, how that reflected what we'd already read or learned and how it was different. And the big things for me that struck me the most were that I'd already left for Post.com when the post-election violence happened. And in my ignorance, like many other outsiders, thought, well, I know that there are deep divisions, but the idea of Kenya having that violence, it shook what you thought you knew. And then actually being in Kenya and talking to Kenyans and seeing how people identify themselves and talk about tribalism, and you would read about the scourge of tribalism always, but to actually see it either being attacked or see people saying things about other people to you was an education. One of the things we visited a group of students at the University of Nairobi, and that year their student elections had even had a certain amount of violence as student groups running for election as kids fought with each other, and that was new, and that it had been worse than the year before when the actual election violence happened. And it was interesting talking with these young political science students about how they saw how they had even greater fear for where the country was going then than they had the year before, which was scary to me. And then the second thing that I found very helpful as an outcome of being able to take that trip in June has been in visiting Laikipia, seeing the impact of soil degradation, the water that's being taken out of the rivers, the way the government, the kind of lack of regulation of that, and to see how community lands are stripped, meeting young men who are taking, you couldn't support cows anymore, so you took the goats 6-10 miles to find where the water was, or you would look to see where the rain was coming down, because then you knew there would be green grass there and you could take your animals to forage. And certainly in the last months we've seen the food crisis grow in Kenya, and it was wonderful to see it ahead of time, and horrible to watch it unfold now. But those were my big takeaways from this trip, and I'm excited for questions.
Terrific. Thank you, all three. And we now have plenty of time for discussion, and I wanted to perhaps start that off by saying it's clear that this was beneficial for you and your fellow editors in terms of gaining knowledge, gaining networks, providing an opportunity to cover some really important stories, ones that don't commonly, for some of the structural reasons in terms of the resources to do it, but in terms of that additional challenge of how to draw the international to a local story and get the space for it. So from the result of this trip, are things that you can reflect on that you may be doing differently, or decisions that you're making that previous to this you might have had a different take on it? Or are you, with your journalists and your assignments, are you having people, is there a different interface with your own journalists that are producing content for you as a result of having been able to go on this trip? How has this changed the way that you do business? And I guess is the short version of that question.
Well, I mean, the first thing I did was I came back with a list of pitches for the poor editors and for poor Stephanie, who kind of said, "Boy, Margaret, this is great, but things that I couldn't really get into, in the course of the trip, but that I thought could bear more investigating." So that was wonderful. I've always been a huge, and I think it's from being at All Africa in terms of how we cover business in Africa, has always been incredibly important to me. And so I think the intersection of commercial agriculture and the water scarcity is a really interesting issue. And then I think there's just a lot of political maneuvering where we got to meet many of the leaders. And so now when you see the wire come across, and you might just get a bulletin at first, you can make sense of that bulletin in a way you couldn't before because you know the players.
Mm-hmm. reflections, or can...
I think it's difficult to pinpoint exactly how it has maybe changed our coverage. I think what happens is, in some ways, you become, even after just 2 weeks in the country on a trip like this, within a newsroom, you become the resident expert on Kenya. And I certainly don't claim to be.
Which is terrifying, but
which is actually completely terrifying. But what you do have, but what you mentioned about contacts and connections, that does actually help to shape coverage. There were people that I met, the ambassador, Ambassador Rannenberger, the person who is the U.S. consul to Somali affairs, somebody that we've had on our program during the time, because he met with Hillary Clinton during her visit there. So I was, through contacts that we had made in country, I was able to secure an interview with him to discuss Somalia. So I think that besides getting labeled as an expert in something I'm clearly not, I think that it has expanded our coverage of Kenya because of what Margaret says. You get a better feel for the story, and you get a better sense of how you can take what you read on wire copy and find the right person or the right story to tell out of it.
Mm-hmm. And just to echo that, just because the world is so much smaller now we have a host of email addresses and Facebook folks and, pharmacists, out in Mombasa, and just it's a wealth of resources that you can touch on when you need to.
Mm-hmm. If I can ask a follow-up, am I correct or overstating the kind of inhibiting nature of this notion that you have to have a local link to and put it in a U.S. context that either makes sense, or whether it's because there's a big Somali overseas community where you are, then you can write stories about Somalia. Am I overstating that? Perhaps with CFR and the BBC program, the whole point is to get the international coverage. So maybe it's a question of the Post. Do you have to kind of make that case for why the suburban Virginians or suburban Maryland people want to read this story? Or is it that that's actually not as inhibiting as perhaps the perception is in terms of getting these stories into U.S. coverage?
I don't work on the foreign desk, so I don't edit the copy that comes in. But as far as the what shows up on the homepage or on your cell phone, no, I think it matters. The local angle matters in terms of which side it shows up or where and how it shows up. Mm-hmm. But whether or not it will show up, it doesn't. The one thing, though, we have fewer people, and the people that are writing have less time, and that means you've just lost so much talent and time, and that has an impact on the story. So then I think you do sometimes see a story that might have been a reporter would have had a lot more time with 5 or 6 years ago. They don't, and so maybe it's not quite as good as it could have been. Mm-hmm. But people are still working their tails off, and you have so many blogs and other kinds of ways that we're getting news, video, that we're getting news to people. So you hope that there's some offsetting richness there. Mm-hmm. But I would say for the most part, no. If it's a good, compelling story, it'll go up in a prominent place.
Mm-hmm. If I can just add to that point that Margaret just made, that it's not so much. I mean, we have to sell an international news to an American audience, and there are some times when that is a tough sell, and you do look for a U.S. angle. But if you're telling a story about children who don't have clean drinking water, how many people in this room have a child? How many people in this room can relate? I mean, it's just about telling human stories, and it doesn't matter. We worry less about sort of having the U.S. angle and more just about having a human angle, having something that people can connect to.
Our organization is quite different. We're not supposed to have a human angle, though I have to say that myself and my colleagues, we do wish that we were actually able to expand the bounds of the reporting that we're able to do. Our audience is meant to be the foreign policy community. And so if our story doesn't have relevance or appeal to that audience, it's a very, very difficult sell. I can say that I think about a year and a half ago when I pitched to my executive editor a story on agriculture in Africa and spurring a green revolution in Africa, he kind of looked at me and said, but why should we care about that? And I have to say that now I feel really vindicated, because the biggest State Department initiative on Africa that's come out of the Obama administration has been a food security initiative and an agriculture development initiative. So sometimes it's about, I think, timing of coverage, and I can't speak for you guys, but I think that I'm able to make a more convincing or compelling case for why some of the stories that I'm interested in should end up on our website. And maybe that's also true for Kenya-related stories for you guys. And now, having been in Kenya, you're able to make a more sophisticated and compelling case for why the story matters.
Okay, terrific. Well, let's bring our colleagues in. Why don't we start with Steve, and then we'll go there and work right across.
Hi, my name is Steve McDonald. I direct the Africa programs here at the Woodrow Wilson Center. I want to start with a congratulations to the IRP. I'm always impressed by what you do and the reporters, the candidates that you have, and I think it's such a useful program. The context of this is I've spent 40 years in and working on Africa, including Kenya. And I've been in Africa in times of more largesse in terms of the media, where most people did have bureau chiefs in South Africa and Nairobi and Dakar and Accra and some other places. But there's always been a great value. I can remember talking to reporters or bureau chiefs who were stationed in Africa who still complained because no one back home at the paper understood what they were trying to do, and there was no Confederates there to help them push a story or to get it the proper attention that it needed. So I think it's just a wonderful, wonderful thing that you become the Confederates of your overseas colleagues, as well as leading stories yourself. The thing that concerns me, because of my years and years in Africa, is the continuity and of this reporting effort, but also not just the continuity, but the grasping of the historical and cultural context of things. Knowing Kenya as well as I do, I'm continually surprised even now to hear persons, as was said in your video here, talk about a stable and democratic Kenya, and how surprised we were that in 2007 in December and subsequently it blew up in violence. I mean, if you know the history of Kenya, you know that in the 2002 elections, in the 1997 elections, the 1992 elections, et cetera, there were levels of violence and displacements of people that was far beyond what we had in December of 2007. That the problems of land tenure, land reform, ethnic divisions, manipulations of those, corruptions within the government, et cetera, go back not just to post-independence but independence days. And I think it's wonderful that individuals like you are getting a grasp of that. But I'm concerned because I see the ebb and flow in reporting. When the crisis breaks out, someone does run out and report on it. But there seems to be very little context to it, going back in the years of all these problems. And so I guess my question is, therefore, I mean, will you continue to report? Will you continue to drive these things? And how will you institutionalize this, pass it on, move it in your wake, because you won't be in that position forever? Those of us who are Africanists and working on this as a lifetime endeavor, of course, do all we can to highlight Africa and African problems and solutions and policy issues over and over again, but the media, of course, is such a key a partner for this, and this a key confederate in trying to do this. That I mean, I welcome that you guys are now engaged. How are you going to keep engaged?
Thank you, Steve. Anyone want to tackle or respond?
I mean, I don't have a good answer, only in the sense that when I was at All Africa and before, all I did was read about Africa. That was all I did, and there was so much from a U.S. high school education that I had to make up, and reading about Francophone Africa is a whole nother story just to get good, there's just fewer books. And now I don't cover, but I am responsible for everything. I get to cover, sports and style and everything. And so there's so much more reading I have to do to catch up. The big thing for me is that African politics and African realities, I mean, this sounds ridiculous, but when you read African newspapers for 3 years and when you travel, you see a reality that isn't often reflected in the media. And or in subtle ways, the way people write about themselves, as opposed to the way a reporter who parachutes in and writes about it, is very, very different. And so I guess for me, it's not about being an expert, but hopefully about asking questions, about pushing us to make one more phone call, and doing all the reading I can, in addition to all the other reading I still need to do to catch up. So I don't have a good answer besides the constant knowledge that we always can and should be doing better about it.
Right. Terrific. Why don't we go right in the middle? Lots of questions.
Hi, my name's Sharon Fon. I'm from South Africa. And the question that I want to ask is something around, from what you're saying and my own experiences, it seems to be very difficult to manage that relationship of presenting something but making it relevant to where you're reporting it to, and it seems to be quite complicated. And that's true in any country. You have to make something newsworthy, and those of us who are academics or policy people, can't understand why the newspapers don't know what a story is, because we think it's clear. But there are two aspects that interest me, and one is the human angle story, because what it does is it caricatures a situation. You're taking one person's experience and making that everybody's experience, and that's relatively problematic. And also what's often a human angle story is the, oh dear, isn't that terrible story. And so it perpetuates this belief that Africa is a basket case. Now, Africa has problems, and I'm not denying that. But at the same time, it seems to me, how do you manage things like who talks? If I look at the video, your experts were not intellectuals or academics or Kenyan commentators. And why not? Because they are there. If you look at Kibera, the African African Population Health Research Center has spent the last 10 years collecting data day in and day out from people living in that area, and could complement the human interest story with, okay, what does this mean for the whole population? They have outstanding spokespeople who do incredible work and could in fact be a source of ongoing information. So it's a question of who talks and how you find who you speak to, and must be even more challenging when you parachute in and out. And similarly, in relation to speaking to the foreign policy community, and I think it extends a little bit of what Steve was saying, quite honestly, I have no idea how Kenya is running its health services right now. They have 2 ministries of health. It's hard enough to get things coordinated when there's 1 ministry of health. And so, yes, having a good government and good governance is important. But from a policy point of view, Kenyan health services are frighteningly under-resourced. And at the same time, Kenya produces nurses every year who cannot be employed because the IMF agreements put a cap on what the government can spend on employing government employees, of which nurses are one. So they are producing nurses who leave Kenya or work in other fields because the government is not allowed. And so the foreign policy issue is, even if there was a good government, the point is the IMF is still there and is still dictating what they can and can't do with their money. And they still will not be able to employ those nurses. So there's kind of a macro political environment that's quite important as well. And you can't just stop. And again, it's that, oh, well, Africa's a basket case. Actually, there are externalities that Africa doesn't control that makes a difference to what happens on the ground. And I suppose my question really is the degree to which your organization does or doesn't imagine developing partnerships, because your point about what's written in African newspapers is very important. I think that the quality of journalism could improve dramatically by journalists there. And are there ideas or opportunities to partner so that you can have more people writing, and writing to a better quality and learning, because it's a craft to learn how to make your issues complex enough, nuanced enough, but also accessible to people in other countries? And is there a space for those? I mean, I know the BBC has done that over periods of time, Is there space more for this organisation to be doing those kinds of activities?
I think I'm going to take a chunk of that, if that's okay, of your questions and your comments, just to address the human interest side of it and how we choose who we choose to speak to, and that is your point is valid, that we can take one person and we can tell their story, and is that person representative? Is the person I spoke to representative of the other 1 million people who live in Kibera? His experience is completely unique. What he went through after those days and the violence that he witnessed, it was his unique experience, and his reaction to it is what I was trying to focus on. And it's the difficult thing when you tackle any story, we all spend a great deal of time trying to figure out the best voices, the best people who can speak to the issues that you're trying to cover. Yes, we may not always get it right. We may not always speak to the person that you, as an expert in this field, may feel like, well, you've missed a huge opportunity. There was somebody who can speak directly to that, who is, and that voice isn't in your story. It's simply a matter of us trying to work with the contacts that we have and the people that we have. And certainly, when you are telling human interest stories, it is difficult, and we are making we're making judgments based on who we meet, who we connect with, and in the case of this trip, the people that we were introduced to and the itinerary that we had according to what was happening with the that was set up for us by the IRP, which was fantastic. So it might not be the best answer, but it is actually just us doing the best we can with trying to sort out who are the best voices to speak to on a story.
Mm-hmm. Louise, maybe you'd like to say a word about the kind of IRP approach to the setup, because there's a lot of kind of research and consultation, such as consultations in rooms like this here at the center, that IRP does with the setup before these guys go. You're going over and you're doing a lot of research to try to find a lot of those right people, from head of state to community leader to man on the street, woman on the street, and then the expert community. So if you could say a word about the process.
Yeah, it takes us from anywhere from minimum of 3 to 4 months to up to a year or more, depending on the country and the difficulty of the country, to put these trips together. We usually look at a variety of themes, and within those themes that we want to cover, we try to find the best available people. And we speak to a variety of people. Often we start here at the Wilson Center and speak to the experts here, but we want to get a broad range, so we're sure that we have balance in the program, that we're not unwittingly carrying out someone's political agenda. We want to hear all points of view, and we go everywhere from requesting meetings, which we usually get because it's a very interesting group that we take over with the head of state, to going in places like Kibera and speaking to some of the humblest people, or going to Nyanza province, people who don't have a voice. What we can realistically do in 2 weeks is give people, it's a sampler, give people a taste of these different issues. There just isn't the kind of time to go into the kind of depth that we'd like on every single issue. But we see it as opening the door. It's not the end when you come back. It's not the end of the trip, but you're armed with some resources to go in to these issues further, depending on the time that you have and the desire to explore those topics. But that's basically what we do to put together. Also, our audience, we're a small organization, and our audience, because we felt there's a need and it's hard to do lots of different things on many different levels, is to focus on the U.S. media and to do strengthen their ability and the resources at hand to do a better job reporting on media, on international issues. Sorry.
Okay, gentleman over there. Yeah.
Thanks. My name's Kevin Kelly. I'm the U.S. correspondent for The Nation in Kenya. And I have a question that takes off a bit from what the woman from South Africa was saying, which is Africans complain a lot about U.S. media coverage being unrelievedly negative of Africa. And that may be justifiable, but it's also true that a lot of negative things are happening in Africa. I'm interested in what you might be able to say about the way in which U.S. coverage of Kenya, such as it is, affects U.S. policy towards Kenya. I interviewed Raila Odinga in New York at the UN a few days ago, and Raila said that a lot of the information that's known in Kenya doesn't get transmitted here. I mean, he has his own agenda, okay? He's coming from a certain place. But his take is that reforms are happening. There's been important progress made towards the agreements that Kofi Annan brokered. It's not the impression that anybody who follows Kenya in the United States has, and it may be a misimpression. But his point may still have validity in that there's a dearth of information about Kenya in any sense, and the degree to which information is available, it's almost all negative. Do you think that that affects U.S. policy toward Kenya?
That's an interesting question.
Give it to that seat of power, CFR, right? Council on Foreign Relations.
It's difficult always to suss out the relationship between U.S. policy toward an area and the media coverage of that area. I would actually flip it around and say that in some cases, U.S. policymakers are attempting to use the media to send a message to a particular country. And I would say that that's definitely the case with Kenya right now. The U.S. government seems to be extremely unhappy with the pace of reform in Kenya and the efforts of the power-sharing government to actually share power in a genuine and meaningful way. And they've been sending messages through the Hillary Clinton trip at the beginning of August. She was very clear in her address that Kenya needed to make major changes by making the first visit by President Obama to the continent since he took his presidency to Ghana instead of to Kenya. That received a lot of media attention as to why wasn't Kenya the place, and that reflects in a way badly on Kenya. So I don't know if the linkage happens so much in the other direction, that the media is influencing U.S. policy. I would say that in the case of Kenya, at least from my perspective, that it's happening in the other direction. That U.S. policy is, or policymakers are using the media as a tool to speak to influential people in Kenya, politicians and otherwise.
Yeah. Thoughts?
Maybe I just wanted to mention some of the impressions. One of the things that the center sent out is things that surprised us that when we were talking about what this panel would be about. So I have my own little list as well. But one thing that did surprise me was the seeming disconnect between what the senior politicians that we met were talking about and what the ordinary people living their lives were concerned about. They didn't seem to be talking about the same issues. So the very real, there was a lot of hunger that we saw in Nyanza province. Not a lot of food around, very hungry children. We didn't hear a lot of talk about that. We heard a lot of talk about the difficulties of governing with this coalition government, where one side always seemed, their priority seemed to be canceling out the initiatives of the other side, and there were many trips to Geneva to look at various issues. So that was one impression that we came away with. The group of students we spoke to were all, no matter what ethnic background they came from, very dissatisfied, very angry at the political leadership. And we had students from all over the country, from all the different provinces, from many different ethnic groups. And it came back to my village everyone in my village has pitched in to send me to university. I have to give back to my village, and there are no jobs for me. Or my village is up in the north near the Somali border. They promised us there would be roads. In the last 2 years, they haven't built 1 kilometer of roads. That's what the students were talking about. And the dialogue of the political leadership was on a whole different set of issues.
Mm-hmm. Okay, question right down here in front. Lots of questions. We fortunately have time, so appreciate everyone's patience.
Hello, my name is Jacqueline, and I'm here just as a young African professional. And Andrea, you mentioned that with reporting, the media tends to converge around disaster and then disappears when peace comes. And I heard you mention the Millennium Village Project. My question to you is, do you not feel that the American audience would also appreciate positive news. My experience here is that, as he mentioned, is that the news is very negative, and while Africa is plagued with a lot of challenges, I believe that there's also positive things going on there, and I don't quite see that reflected in the newspapers and articles that I read.
I would say that's a completely fair assessment, and it is a problem. One of the things that was mentioned to us when we, as Louise says, we met with students at University of Nairobi, and one of the things that one of the students stood up and asked us about was, I think the question was, you only seem to cover poverty and pirates. And at that point, a lot of the coverage of the U.S. media was on Somali pirates. And I wish I had a solution. I wish I could say that there's a clear answer to changing that. And certainly there were some things that I witnessed in Kenya that as Louise mentioned, that there are things that were just heartbreaking and very difficult. We also were exposed to a lot of really positive programs in Kenya, and I like to think that that will also be some of the positive things that we saw, that will be injected in our coverage and how we look at it as well. And it's another issue of access, of being able to sort of see it and not just see Kenya lumped together with the rest of sub-Saharan Africa or of Africa as a whole, and looking at the problems that Kenya has and some of the positive sides of what's happening there.
Yeah, it may be fair to say anybody who's watching the 11 o'clock news here in this country, the dynamic, unfortunately, is not limited to coverage of Africa. If we watch local news here, everything is either, everything is negative. So I think it's a larger challenge for journalism to find ways to get through and tell compelling positive stories and not just who gets shot where. Okay, why don't we move over here and then kind of come through lots of questions, and maybe what we'll start to do is take a couple of them and then you guys can respond to make sure we get everybody a chance. So please, ma'am.
Thank you. My name is Jerry Eddings. I work for the International Center for Journalists, but I had a long history before I came to them. 25 years ago, I used to hear and maybe even say something slightly different than what you said about people only being interested in pirates and in poverty. When I was a working journalist covering Africa, it used to be witches and witchcraft, witches and war then, but that our editors only seemed to be interested in stories about witches and war. There have been people in this country who have been spending the last 25, 30 years trying to get a more complete and more accurate picture in this country of what's going on in Africa, and it's an ongoing battle, and I hope it continues. There are new challenges now, some of which I think IRP, Louise and John Shidlovsky and others are responding to, new challenges in our industry. When I was a foreign correspondent, it was an issue of the constituency for what we wanted to put to send the information and news we wanted to send was not here. Now it's that the foreign correspondents aren't on the ground there because of what's happening in the industry. I apologize if I have more comment than question. But I actually wanted to somewhat respond to what the academic, the lady from South Africa, asked you earlier, because you had a good response but not a complete one, and I think I can help complete the response. What IRP does is really important in that you help people in our newsrooms who wouldn't normally have a window on what's going on in these continents around the world, because you're not just Africa, get a better picture so that when they receive stories from their people on the ground, they can they have a better context to put them in. That's really important, because to the extent that we do have foreign correspondents on the ground, somebody back in the newsroom needs to be able to see it through clear eyes, what you sent. What we do at the International Center for Journalists is open a different door. We send Americans and others to work in newsrooms around the world as trainers on long-term programs. We run the Night Fellowship program, and what we do is embed them in those in those newsrooms. We have somebody in the nation right now, as a matter of fact, who is a health journalism fellow who has been training nation journalist for a year and a half. She's doing her second year of a fellowship right now to do a better and more complete job of covering health issues in Kenya, in their own communities. And we have fellows all across the continent. We have 8 Knight Fellows across Africa now, and actually we're looking for a few more right now. One for Malawi, one for this is a pitch. One for Malawi, one for Senegal, one for Zambia, to spend a year as trainers. We look for senior journalists in this country, so that in fact we are hoping to build the kind of capacity among journalists in different countries around the world, so that as our news organizations have a smaller and smaller ability to send people abroad, they have, in their different countries, have a greater ability to send us information, to act as stringers for us when we can't get people on the ground in their countries, and to have that more complete picture because they are writing about their own communities. I think it's great when we can receive the information here and have people who understand a little bit about what they're saying. But I think maybe in this climate, it's equally, or if not more important, that we develop more and more journalists on the ground in these various countries who can cover their own stories through their own eyes with their own understanding of their communities, so that we can take advantage of that. And hopefully, thanks to programs like IRPs, there'll be people here who will want to receive that kind of information. I don't think I had a question. I just wanted to respond.
That's very helpful. Yeah, you guys think?
One of the most interesting experiences that we had when we were in Kenya was a panel discussion with a group of Kenyan journalists. The Kenyan media is incredibly vibrant, and actually one of the really positive, hopeful stories that you could tell about Kenya. The press is the most trusted institution in the country. It ranks above the police, any government institution, the judiciary. It's the press. So if you're looking for a positive, hopeful story in Kenya, it really is the media. They're doing a great job. They're exposing corruption cases. They're reporting on health. They're calling the government to task every day. And definitely, I think that they should be supported in whatever way possible to do even better work than they're doing now.
And I just say I couldn't agree more, and especially as more newspapers and other media organizations get their own websites, people all over the world are going to be able to find and read it. So that's wonderful. And I wonder if I might also add one more thing to close the door in terms of what I was talking about in terms of context and how we report it or don't report because we don't have the context. I was once railing back when I was at All Africa about, there was some story, and it was about Togo, but they wrote it from South Africa, and they didn't quote any Togolese, and how could this be in a U.S. newspaper? I was so angry. And someone who had been covering Africa for 40 years said, Margaret, you should have read what went on in U.S. media in the 60s and 70s. And that in many ways, our U.S. media's coverage of Africa, for all the problems that we have now, is certainly more richer and less racist and all that good stuff. So that is one thing to tack on that for me I was very upset. But if you look at it over 40 or 50 years, there's a lot of good things have happened.
Okay. Now we really must gather questions. It's great that you guys want to respond, but let's gather a number of them. So where's the microphone? Kaylee, just why don't you work your way down the row here, and we'll gather a bunch of them.
I have a short comment and as well as a little question. The comment is that I think we are all intentionally or unintentionally packaging Africa as one single entity, one country. When we talk about the African progress, we may talk about 2 or 3 countries, but not Africa as a whole. We all know what that means. In terms of journalism, definitely Kenya is one of the brightest. But if you go across the road into Ethiopia, where it don't exist at all, then talking about media in Africa per se would be a little off track. The second comment is, no matter who and when, what you have shown us in East Kenya and Eastleigh, in Nagbar, and many other places in Nairobi, the life of those people have been that. is not an offspring of yesterday's clash. It has nothing to do with the presence of World Bank or Kenyatta coming back to life. It is the real life of those people. And for me to see a light at the end of the tunnel for those people is a very, very tiny one. Okay, to my question. It is good that you've visited Kenya, but you miss me a little bit. That is the true life of the people that you have reported on, but there are other people, the product of the neighboring countries' political situation, the refugees from Ogaden, on which I just saw a small film produced by the Ogadenians. It's called The Silent Cry, which is really moving. Refugees from Ethiopia. Haven't you come across any one of them, or are you confined yourself to that of the Kenyan propers?
Okay, now that's terrific. So save that one in terms of talking to a variety of people for Kenya's story. Yeah, please.
Hi, my name is Katrina Schwartz. I work with the Friends Committee on National Legislation, and we are currently doing a lot of work on Kenya in terms of prevention. So I'm interested, you obviously all come from a lot of different backgrounds. You were interested in different things when you went to Kenya, and I'm wondering that now we have 2012 elections coming up, and there's obviously a potential for violence again. It's clear that there's still some simmering tensions, and I'm wondering, from your perspectives, what are people's feelings about the coalition government and its success. And I mean, one of the things that we're doing is trying to help Congress focus on Kenya as a potential problem for the future, and that we need to be continuing to look at it and build structures for peace there. So I'm wondering, as people who were there and talking with all kinds of people, what were you hearing about the coalition government and its success or lack thereof?
Okay, and if you could hand to the gentleman right here, and then we'll move our way over.
My name is Lucian Jora, and I work for the Romanian Ministry of Education. So you have just mentioned the fact that you are trying to draft your materials, according with not with an American perspective, but with a general human perspective. What will be a typical American perspective?
Okay, well, that may be as difficult to characterize as a typical Kenyan one, but Maria?
My name is Maria Ivanova. I'm a fellow here at the center. And I'd like to reinforce the point that my colleague from South Africa made about the human aspect. And I really sympathize with how difficult your job is to make a story that actually resonates with people. And you need to bring in a human story to make that happen. However, I think it's good to then step up to the next level of analysis and say, what does that mean for the country? What does that mean for the region? What does that mean for the world? And we often don't see those aspects reflected in stories about various countries around the world. But I've also had the privilege of working with journalists in Kenya in exactly that perspective. I worked on producing a movie on global environmental governance, and there's nothing more abstract than that, right? And it's with the Kenyan journalist, Joe Ageo. We produced a movie that is now called Quest for Symphony, and I'd be glad to give you a copy. It's 16 minutes on what global environmental governance is, and the acuity with which this African journalist linked the human stories to the global developments is just amazing. And so I'd like to reinforce then that call for going to the region for that talent, because it's there. And then my yes or no question, it could be a yes or no answer. When you were there, did you visit the international organizations that are headquartered in Nairobi? That's UN Habitat and the UN Environment Program. And did you actually get an impression from the people of what did those organizations have an impact on Kenya? Yes or no? And if yes, then what has been the impact of having UN Habitat and yet one of the largest slums in Africa right next to it? and the UN Environment Program, and yet one of the worst environmental degradation sites in the world.
Okay, why don't we cut it off there and then have another round of questions.
Maybe I'll start with what you just spoke about. Yes, we actually did visit the UN EP. We didn't speak to anyone at UN Habitat, and they spoke very well about the environmental challenges that Kenya faces, but as to what their exact effect on the country has been, I think it's difficult to gauge. I think that they've felt somewhat stymied by trying to forge relationships with key government actors, to be honest. I can't speak to UN Habitat, but it is, I agree, very interesting that it's headquartered in Nairobi and you have Kibera. I think oftentimes, and this is something that I struggle with a lot in my own work, is trying to understand what actual effect some of these large multilateral agencies have on the ground. What is the World Bank actually doing in Ghana? What are they actually doing in Kenya? You know, they have a program, it has a nice name, but does the money get distributed? Who does it go to? These things, they're very, very difficult, and I guess I would say that having more Kenyans or Ghanaians who could report on these things and look into them in terms of transparency and accountability would be incredibly helpful.
Just to clarify, you met with Akim Steiner at UNEP? Yeah, so they met with the executive director of UNEP.
Just to reiterate what Stephanie was saying, that generally the conversation that we were listening to at UNEP, it sounded like they've invested a great deal, they have a number of programs, but anytime we question about sort of support from Kenyan government, how was it, what kind of a partnership they were building with the Kenyan government, it was all pretty vague, and I think somewhat frustrating, I think, for people at UNEP trying to actually have the Kenyan government take up what is going to the involvement that they will need to have to solve some of these problems.
Terrific.
I could do some of the earlier questions,
sure,
if that's useful. In terms of what folks thought about the coalition government, most everyone we met seemed very, very frustrated by it. And felt they weren't doing anything, no matter who they'd voted for. That seemed to be a common thread. And I'd be curious what other folks think, but the way I would characterize how people felt about the future was very much that they didn't want there to be violence. They didn't want to see that, and yet somehow felt powerless that, well, it just is getting worse. And yeah, I mean, it was kind of like, well, I don't feel this way, and I am scared by this, and I don't want it to happen, and I'm against it, and yet things are getting worse, and yet I don't trust people as much as I did before. So I'd be curious what other people think, but take that what you will. And we didn't meet anyone from the Ogaden, but we did talk a lot about Kenya's porous northern border and security issues there. So.
I think it's really hard to say what's going to happen in 2012. There are some, among the general population, there is a kind of hopefulness, maybe overly optimistic about the fact that the country can move in a positive direction. Kenya is such a young country. 70% of the population is under 30. And those young people have tremendous aspirations for changing the country. They want to hold political office. They want to become lawyers. They want to run businesses. How much they'll be able to do that in a business climate which is constrained by, difficult political issues, it's hard to say. It's true that there isn't a sophisticated political party system, so the two political parties are not issue-based. So without a really, sophisticated structure of parties that have platforms that are issue-based instead of ethnic group-based or population-based, it's hard to be optimistic about 2012, I think.
I would say that from some of the comments that I remember from some of the students that we spoke to, there was one thing that I found quite interesting was that there was some level of blame that was placed on the international community and focused at the United States for what they felt. Some Kenyans felt that they're been given this marriage of convenience, that with the coalition government that was brokered with the help of Kofi Annan and with Ambassador Rannenberger, that people felt this got sort of foisted upon them, that this wasn't a long-term solution, and the fact that they were going to have to live with this for 5 years was not, that there was some resentment towards those who, outside of Kenya, who had helped to broker the coalition government, which actually was one of the comments that I was interested in and surprised to hear.
Okay. So now we not neglect this side of the house. So Sean, can you make your way around the table there? Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I work with Population Action International, and I guess my question is a little bit more practical. We're thinking of doing, and we work on reproductive health issues. We're thinking of doing a media study tour next year, and I'm having a hard time deciding, do we want to try approach the Washington Post or the Huffington Post in terms of who to, in a sense, sponsor? And it's not just like a new media, old media question. It's, in one sense, obviously the Washington Post, if you did the story, it gets to the larger audience that you have there. But it seems that you already have a reporter in Nairobi, so Huffington Post definitely does not have a reporter in Nairobi, and as those are the growing outlets, that's kind of where I want to also make sure that they do going forward in the future. So it's a bit of a structural question. And then one other comment that you made about the Kenyan media being so strong, that also made me think, should what we also be doing in facilitating these relationships is joining the editors in the U.S. with the actual reporters who are already doing that? Why bother spending all this time getting reporters from here to there when the great reporting is already being done? So those are two questions that are a little bit amorphous. Sorry.
If you could just hand it back up the aisle there, you got.
My name is Josh Ryman. I'm a student at George Washington University. I also work here at the Wilson Center. That's ironic that you asked that, because my question's right up the same alley. I was going to ask about the vibrant Kenyan press, and if they're a potential resource for U.S. media. I was also curious how much U.S. media relies on freelance journalists in Kenya. And the other related question is how much of a presence you saw of foreign media and foreign reporters being based either in Nairobi or coming over and doing trips like your own. Thank you.
Right behind you.
My name's Colleen Beck. I work for Population Connection. It's a nonprofit here. But my question is actually, I worked at the UN during an internship in the Africa office in Nairobi 3 years ago. And I did a project on water initiatives in urban agriculture. So mainly I worked in Kibera and Mathare a little bit. And I just wanted to see if you have any updates on that area and farming practices there, and if it's still going on, and water access. And then my second question is, when I came back from Nairobi, I was very angry, especially at the government. And you all speak very eloquently about your experience there, and I just wanted to know if you had any tips on how to phrase things or about Africa. Thanks.
Okay. And then was there another one? Yeah, right there, next to you, Sean.
Hi, I'm Adam Graham Silverman. I was an 05 IRP fellow. I went to Mozambique, and so I've also been a beneficiary of this fine program. A question popped into my head because of what the mention of the Millennium Villages and your largely positive comments about them. And sitting here in D.C., they are a part of a debate with a significant sort of anti-aid component to it, and we've heard some strains of that. Paul Kagame being a good example, but I'm wondering if that was something you ran into there as well, and how the dynamics of that debate, exist in Kenya.
Okay. So who would like to?
Maybe I'll just address the Millennium Villages project quickly, and we could talk about this separately in a lot of detail. I'm actually very critical of the project. I said that the people there were tremendously grateful for what's been done for them. That's true, but they also don't have a sense that that's ever going to end. There was a lot of hopefulness about what else the Millennium Villages project will do for them. Well, there may not be a what else, because when the money ends, the money ends. So then what happens to the benefits of the project? It's, up for debate, but we could talk about it in more detail.
I would say that one comment that was made at various points about the Millennium Village, it's like, kind of the jokes were made about the Potemkin Village, because you go in and you do get, these people are they're very positive. They introduce you to people who are, successfully fish farming, and you go to the schools, and these people are very, very happy to be a part of the project. I questioned a guy who was farming fish, and he very proudly told me about how he had been sustained. He was now at a point where he no longer received money from the project, and he was managing on his own after a couple of years of startup money that was invested. But when I asked him about where do his kids go to school, what health clinic do they go to, every other aspect of his life was still being funded by the Millennium Village. Even if he was being put forward as the success story, here he is, sustainable fish farming, his life, the rest of his life was being funded by the village. So I think that Stephanie's correct in that. I think we all had, we saw the benefit that the people who were part of the project, they were huge proponents of it, and were so happy to talk about it. But yeah, there were huge issues that we saw as well connected to it.
I could maybe try and tackle some of the earlier ones with the old media, new media stuff. I'd say find the folks that you think are really talented and that you think will reach the biggest audience. And that's what I would say. In terms of water access in Kibera, I don't know too much in terms of statistics of what has changed, but I know when we were there, people were still, illegally hooking onto the pipes and not having really clean water, and, no sanitation. So, kids are out in it. So that was what we saw.
We did see people growing kale in Kibera, a lot of it. So we didn't. I think urban agriculture is fascinating, but we didn't spend a lot of time looking at it, actually. And then on this idea of should we connect U.S. editors to African reporters directly, I think it's a really good question and really interesting one to think about. Every media outlet has different things that they're looking for in the way that they tell a story. And you, Margaret, can probably speak about this best of any of us because you've read the most African media through your work at All Africa. Some of the stories that are being produced by reporters in Ghana, reporters in Botswana, are not stories that a U.S. audience would be interested in, frankly. They're incremental, they're very specific, they don't give context that a U.S. audience would need to understand why the story is important. And I think that some of those things could make it very difficult for a U.S. editor to work with an African journalist. But that's not to say that it shouldn't happen. It's just that there are definite challenges to doing so.
And there are more newspapers are turning to freelancers for all parts of their papers. At the same time, freelancer budgets are shrinking. So there theoretically are more opportunities to write as a freelancer, but it's much harder to make a living at it. It's my impression.
Yeah, Global Post, if you guys are familiar with that website, they're paying their freelancers about, if you're an in-country freelancer, you write 4 stories a month for them, and you're paid $1,000. This is $250 a story. It's frightening, actually. We've been talking about how do you tell a complicated and sophisticated and honest and accurate story, and $250 to write your 800-word story. It's very difficult to do the work necessary to do a really good story.
with that kind of compensation.
And I would just say with radio journalism, if you are a freelance radio reporter and you're in the field and you're pitching a story that is 8 or 9 minutes on what is a daily news program like ours, it's unlikely that we're going to accept a commission. We're going to commission you for an 8 or 9 minute story. So that also gets to the fact that you might not get the complexity. You may not cover as many of the issues that you'd like to in that story because we may only be willing or able to pay you for 4 minutes or 5 minutes for a story.
Always back to the money.
If I can address the how to not get angry at the government. If you can find that answer, I'd be willing to get some advice from you. I think that we had a fantastic opportunity to meet with, we met with the Vice President, we met with the Prime Minister, we met with a number of officials in Kenya, and I think that there were always going to be moments where you have to sit on your hands and count to 10 and try and think of a very polite way of asking about things like corruption, which, we certainly, every time we were put in front of, these people who are, have huge influence in the country, you have to be very polite about how you do it, but we certainly did our best to try and put hard questions to these people. But I completely understand your frustration.
Okay. Well, I think we've had one of the better successes in terms of getting through lots of questions, even some longer ones, in terms of setting some context and sharing insights from different perspectives. Thank all four of you. Thank the three of you, the editors, who kind of share insights where you're coming from and where you're going with the knowledge and the networks and such. And covering this, I think a lot of the folks in the room and certainly at the center and working with IRP, it's part of the objective of these meetings is to continue that network and contacts developing, going both ways in terms of the diversity of people in the room, from the research side, from the fellow journalist side, from the practitioner side, and then understanding better how they can be supportive of providing that larger context or providing the critical contact and such to further the amount and the quality of the coverage of these critical issues. So I want to thank all four of you and thank the audience for some good questions, and please join me in thanking our panelists for an excellent session.